Draft physics video. There's comments again. Partially, mostly, I guess. Of just the general tone is still the same general tone. That somehow these arguments have been made some points in the past that somehow are all encompassing as a proof that no other mechanical model can be devised that can fit the circumstances of the inverse square law, the relationship between velocity and a slowing down of atomic decay or function. What else does it predict? The predictions. The prediction of light being bent hasn't really been proven in a decisive way. So that one's still subject to critique. And if it's wrong, a wrong prediction, what is that going to mean for your side? But just this whole argument that somehow the current model somehow does explain everything when it explains just about nothing in terms of any details provided. So I'll make the argument again. The reason why these people feel emboldened is just because, yes, my theory is so simple that it provides opportunity to pick at these pieces that they never have to explain. Physics has never explained why light doesn't interact with light. Two beams of light, the force doesn't interact. And they surmise that all the other forces, through different experiments, also don't interact with each other. They need something material to show up before the force can have any effect. The force doesn't blend with another force. It blends. The only way the math is done is another piece of matter has to show up to make it happen. Now, I'd argue that Einstein's enhancements to Newton's gravity theory is just based on what's in his field equations equals sign. Essentially what I've been arguing is that the sun, an equal amount of mass in the sun, moves towards the earth as the earth moves towards the sun. That's the way gravity works. It's induced in both players. For the earth to create gravity, it must absorb it. And for the sun to create gravity, it must absorb it by moving in the direction of the thing it wishes to pull towards it. And that's how you get the precession of Mercury, because the center of the Earth, the center of the sun's gravity in Einstein's equations is allowed to move. And that's the difference between Einstein and Newton. Now, that is perfectly consistent with a description of, say, Mach gravity, just adding the component that it's not about this idea of technically pushing something, because the thing that happens technically when you push something is that you convey to it force. It absorbs a force, and that's what you're communicating. And that absorption has a consequence. While it's in the thing, moving it, it will affect other things. It's sort of like us being in gravity, but we don't get to absorb the gravity. So we can't, in a sense, add to gravity or create gravity because we don't do any moving physically. We just transfer the force from our head to our feet and leave it as force. So the force kind of just goes through us because we can't move. That means we can't absorb it. We can't keep it. It doesn't, we don't create a shadow. So in a sense, we're not, because we're suspended, we can't actually impose on the Earth a gravitational pull towards us, because we can't absorb the energy that the Earth would be, the low pressure the Earth would move into. We can't create it, because at our feet is a high pressure. We're pushing this stuff physically, and so the force goes through us. So anyway, I just, for context, again, I have to keep repeating this for context. It's fine, you want to make these technical arguments about elements of physics where they have explained nothing and I'm explaining something. So I'm giving you an answer for why there's velocity. I'm giving you an answer for why there's magnetic attraction and repulsion. And I'm giving you a real physical force to explain why the Earth moves towards the sun. And I'm giving you a physical explanation for why things become time dilated when they have velocity. Why velocity is potentially disruptive to the function of matter. Any timing cycles it has built into it will be affected by the acquisition of velocity. They don't answer any of those questions. And then I also just answered the question of the strong force, why protons are capable of being very close to each other inside of a nucleus by just putting electrons in between them. Alright, so that was part of this interesting. So anyway, so that's the context here. So the level of the argument should be recognizing that my theory does a lot more than their theory does in terms of providing explanations. So these little hangs you have on these little details, I call them, are rather insignificant compared to the fact that the theory has going for it this fact that it fits tons and tons and tons of solid evidence regarding what the effects are. And I'm providing actual causes, not bent space or virtual photons or other invented pretend mechanisms. Alright. So anyway, yeah, I don't, getting into the real, I like the idea of it. It's just going to be a gnarly subject to get into the whole chemistry portion of it, in the sense of the atomic structure, and whether or not a hydrogen atom technically is like the other atoms, or whether it's just an enhanced neutron, in the sense that it's just a neutron that maybe the electron is further away from the proton, or it's spinning, it's rotating. And those could be important differences, that what we call all these other complex particles could just be neutrons that are disguised by the fact that they're spinning. If you spin a magnet, I mean, the key thing with a neutron is the idea that, let's say the neutron is a proton and an electron, very close together. The argument would be, let's see how to best say this. Yes, so if that's the first dipole. So the electron, the proton are the dipoles. They're absorbing and filtering exactly the opposite components in the force in the field, and consequently they have an attractive force between them, and the capacity to move force. But let's say you had a magnet and you spun it, and then you put a charged body next to it. Well, clearly, if it's spinning at a rate that's anywhere fast, the charge isn't going to do anything, because the attraction and repulsion are going to balance each other out, and so it's going to look like this doesn't have a charge because it's spinning. Those kind of explanations, I think, are part of how they're deciding to call something a hadron or some other, meson or some other kind of thing, and it's really the same thing, just slightly different in terms of it's got velocity or it's rotating. Anyway, some guy G Dave. I didn't want to imply that I didn't see your comment. Well, I'll say, I intend to go to the Wikipedia page on Lesage gravity or Mach gravity, and I'll read it. It'll be fun because somebody did post 2 big hunks of the text, and it was almost funny to read just because of the way the argument was being made, and it was just a strangled effort to attempt to make the counter argument by going through almost the whole history of all the argument, and all the arguments end up being the same argument. And again, they overtly do things like say, well, those particles would have to be neutrinos, when that wasn't what Lesage said, and it certainly wasn't what the guy 100 years before him said. So that's certainly a pigeonhole you don't have any right to shove the theory into, just for the purpose of saying it doesn't work if they're neutrinos. I mean, they aren't suggested that, no one suggested that they were. So anyway, that's just such a straw man. It's just so obvious. And so anyway, so I just want to make the point that the argument is just some theoretical argument that this field of energy, there is no mechanism that could be invented that it would allow this thing to travel through it without friction. And clearly, as photons already demonstrate, depending on the configuration of the force, these things can travel right through each other without affecting each other at all. And so it just depends on what configuration the matter is in, whether or not it's absorbing force or whether it's traveling through it, theoretically, or whether it's eating it, is another way to put it. So anyway, so I go through those arguments, and I'm working on getting my own model as simple as I can make it in terms of explaining the possibilities that understanding it kinetically, and the fact that the head-on collision, okay, as reflections, looks exactly like a complete miss in terms of the energy equation. It's the outcome, the effect, will be exactly the same regardless of the cause. A complete miss or a complete hit, it's exactly the same effect in the end. A bit going this way and a bit going that way. Alright, and so another part of this is that a lot of this hangs on this fact that I'm basically arguing that matter contains force moving the speed of light. That that's what gives us 3 dimensions, is the very fact that we have emanating from us energy pushing in all directions. And that energy is contained because of pressure. And in this physical world, it's kind of obvious that you have the atmospheric pressure that's keeping us in one place, keeping us from expanding. And in the deeper argument about what's happening on the nuclear level, I'm saying a similar kind of process takes place, and that it's always about this pressure, and everything just moves based on where the pressure pushes it. But everything's moving the speed of light. All the little bits are moving the speed of light, so no interaction can be faster than that. So if 2 things moving the speed of light did hit each other, it doesn't really matter whether you call this fish that was in here in a school of fish. Say you have 2 schools of fish and they collide. It doesn't matter how fast the school's going. All that matters is how fast the individual fish are going. And so all the interactions are at the same speed. So even when something's stationary and it barely bangs into something else, the things that actually hit the fish are going very fast. even though the blob itself might be going very slow, because most of the stuff in the blob might be going this way or that way, and so only a few of the fish are going, well, none of the fish are going faster than the speed of light. So they're contained by the pressure. Anyway, so I'm just saying it gets it's not, it's simple, but it's still layers of physics, and that people don't have any respect for that either. But this idea that they know what can't happen, that somehow they've proven what can't happen, is just a nonsense argument. So anyway, so this Dave guy, he says, could you go over the MIT Slack collaboration, specifically the initial experiments to prove the quark theory? So it's just a PDF. I did go to it. It is kind of simplistic in terms of just citing the different experiments throughout history that were done to identifying these particles that were created in different types of accelerators, I guess you could say, as a general class. Was speculated about what they were and what caused them and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting, but again, it kind of demonstrates that somebody just sort of comes up with an idea, and then that idea gets kind of written as a truth, and then they just keep fitting everything to that previous model. And I don't know whether that's good science or not. It's dangerous science, let's put it that way, because it's easy to make a mistake, and then you're stuck conforming everything to something, a wrong assumption. So anyway, somebody says there's no neutron in hydrogen. Well, anyway, about the comment, about the Wikipedia page, I didn't delete the comments, and they're gone. So I don't, they're not in the spam folder. So I guess the guy deleted his own comments. So I'm just, if somebody else saw it, I'm just pointing out I didn't delete them. I mean, I'm perfectly happy for people to post the Wikipedia page information, because, in my opinion, it is so trivial. And again, in the context of where a couple of years ago I just tried to modify a couple of sentences on the page and add one link, and to prevent me from doing that, they annihilated all the external links, because they knew they had to keep mine in there to be fair, and so they just wiped out them all to censor me, which is, one reason to be suspicious of the integrity of a Wikipedia page. But anyway, that's ancient history. Moving on. Alright, so this guy says there's no neutron in hydrogen. Deuterium has one and tritium has two. Yeah, well, I have to, as I stated in earlier videos, my chemistry is, I haven't been watching chemistry lectures. So, yes, my immediate knowledge of pulling up molecular models is not very good. So, but it doesn't really change anything. What I was really trying to get to was what are the elemental parts of an atom. And the point I was making is the nucleus that's the most famous, I would say, for being transportable is the helium nucleus, and so that's what I was focused on. But the fact that the helium nucleus might be made out of two hydrogen atoms isn't in conflict with anything I'm saying, I don't think. Alright, so I'll just read some of the comments in here. This is some sort of argument that went on forever between different people. I'll read the first comment, I suppose. How long until people, so this is reverse, people accept this? Until you start proving it. So, obviously a lack of understanding of what a theory is and theoretical physics is, in the sense that they're not easy to prove. It's not easy to prove the existence of any of this, in the sense that you can't videotape it, certainly. So all you can do is create a model that fits the products of experiments. And as I've pointed out, this model does something your model doesn't do, which is it explains velocity as a real mechanism, force that something possesses. It explains magnetism. It explains the strong force. The weak force is too ambiguously defined now to even bother with, but and it also provides an explanation for why there's a relationship between slowed radioactive decay and velocity. So those essentially are as good as predictions in the sense that they're better than, I would almost argue, in that they answer questions that haven't even been answered. So that's part of a proof, I would say, you fucking idiot. Anyway, make accurate predictions. Well, I'd like Einstein to have made accurate predictions. Okay, I mean, certainly the relationship between velocity and the slowing of atomic decay is all you have as evidence. And all that is a relationship between velocity and decay. It isn't evidence that time is a dimension that you can bend. It's just a relationship between velocity and a slowing down of atomic functions. That's all you have evidence of. Have an actual model that can make real-world predictions. Well, I'm predicting that photons probably aren't bent by gravity, and I've clearly predicted that magnets are creating an actual force. I mean, gravity moves through them, and they filter the gravity, and it's a real ton that moves between the atom and the other atoms of the object it's changing or interacting with, creating current in, let's say. So again, I'm making real-world predictions as accurately as the current model. Well, again, you're saying they're accurate predictions, and I'm saying they're vague predictions. A vague notion that somehow when you're moving, you're bending time, when the simple answer is no, you're multitasking, and that means you can't do as much stuff in the same amount of time. Very different explanations, and I don't think there's any more theory, any more evidence for your interpretation than there is for my interpretation. I also make predictions about what galaxies are doing, and there's no dark matter. So, what do you think your model predicts dark matter, or do you think they made it up? Let's see, or at least make a prediction that the other theories don't predict. Well, I can't, predicting things in a world where we've already know what exists would be kind of silly. So I can predict is that you have these things wrong, and the evidence will show that. So I'm saying the evidence will show that lensing doesn't happen. Photons aren't bent by gravity, they're bent by interacting with electrons. So you can scatter photons, but you cannot lens them with gravity. You can lens them with electrons. You can lens them with a piece of glass, but you can't lens them with gravity. Let's see. Otherwise, you're just drawing pictures and making assertions. Well, again, if you're going to call it just drawing pictures by saying, well, here's an illustration of how magnetism is completely explained as material that's filtering two kinds of gravity, and it equals the same thing as the forces that interact between protons and electrons. So, to say it's just a drawing of like happy faces or something, no, that's not what it's a drawing of. It's a drawing of a model, and the model fits the evidence completely. It's as unproven as the other alternative theory. So again, the other alternative theory doesn't unify physics. So the other alternative theory doesn't explain anything. Virtual photon, bent space are not explanations of mechanism. Saying it just obeys geometry, that's the vacuous statement. and you don't understand how that's vacuous or empty or useless as an explanation, it's not any better than saying God did it. To say bent space did it is just saying God did it. And if you can't see that, well, I'm sorry, you're pretty stupid if you can't see the similarity. String theory is elegant, etc. What good is it? It doesn't work. So what good is it? The strings get all knotted up. It can't work because it creates kind of permanent relationships that the universe doesn't demonstrate exist. It doesn't move through time in any kind of rational way. And many physicists thought it could be true, but none of them were absolutely confident it was. They were waiting for the data. Well, again, their data isn't going to help because they've now made the theory itself so dependent on so many of these invented particles that I don't think they're ever going to recover from how many wrong assumptions are built into the theory. I mean, as an explanation of attraction and repulsion, it might have had some value, but once you interject all of these other mechanisms to interfere with that simple rubber band, yeah, you're done for. And like I said, even if you got it to work, you'd still be stuck with no real mechanism, no real definition of what the strings are. And the fact is, it's not strings, as I'm pointing out. It's a push universe, not a pull universe. So it's working from the wrong end anyway. I mean, it's doomed to failure, in my opinion. And I don't think it explains anything, in my opinion. I mean, it's in many ways just incomprehensible. So maybe it works for you in some way, but I don't see any value in it at all. It doesn't explain how two magnets move together or move apart. It doesn't explain any of that. Let's see, and now they're starting to believe it isn't because it predicted things that aren't showing up. Well, again, it didn't really predict them. Their creation of a whole bunch of more complexity ended up making it a lie that they just couldn't make truth anymore. The story got too silly, too many talking bears. Now the story doesn't have anywhere to go. This is how science works. Well, in your opinion, that's exactly how it doesn't work. That's how it fails, in my opinion. People are more than willing to accept your theory, but the burden of proof is on you, not us. Well, again, your definition of what the proof would be for a theory that unifies physics, how exactly would the proof be any different than explaining the phenomena that exists? I mean, I can do experiments right here. I can show you two magnets, and I can explain to you what happens. I can drop this battery. That's an experiment. Now, your explanation is the battery's following some geometric law. Who knows? It's just some geometry thing it's doing. It's sliding down magical geometry tracks or something that are getting narrower, and the space is somehow forcing it to squeeze down towards the Earth. Now, I'm providing an explanation that says, no, there's these invisible photons. So just like the radio waves are invisible to me and they're hitting me all the time, and the microwaves are invisible to me and they're hitting me all the time, and all the space rays that are invisible are hitting me all the time, even some X-rays. I mean, the atmosphere certainly blocks a bunch of them, but they get converted into heat or some other kind of radiation that's hitting me all the time. The infrared radiation is hitting me all the time. I don't see it. Well, the same thing's happening here. There's a whole bunch more radiation that doesn't have a frequency. It's not on the electromagnetic spectrum because it doesn't have a frequency. It's not coming at a consistent pulse rate. It's just the pulses. No consistency to when they happen. So therefore they can't be filtered out of all the noise. But there's this tremendous amount of noise. And that's what's pushing the battery. Because what's happening is that the Earth is moving matter this way. And in doing that, absorbed force that would have hit this battery. Stuff was moving the speed of light, coming from China, heading for China, coming down on China. And it hit the earth, and it moved it. Or it hit a bird and moved it down a little. You know, a heavy bird, a bird that weighs as much as this battery. And when that happened, force was absorbed to create that movement. And when that force was absorbed to create that movement, it means it didn't hit here. It was heading for here at the speed of light, and it didn't get here. And so that's why this battery goes down, is because there's force that didn't get to it. That's an explanation. And I could do that with magnets, and I could show you why in great detail, essentially. And then I could show you two magnets and why they interact the way they do, and then I can show you a magnet and a conductor, and I explain to you exactly why the electrons are moving this way, because the electron force pushes that way, and the protons are attractive, so they're moving this way, and it's compressing, creating more pressure between the electrons, and the voltage will be higher the quicker I move it. I can explain the whole thing. So what are you griping about? That's, to me, a very good theory, is one that can explain the phenomena that's observed. Except the burden of proof is on you, not us. So again, you don't have to prove your theory unchallengeable, like it does answer everything, it's great. No, you can just leave huge holes in it. Just make up stuff, virtual photon, bent space. You can just make up dimensions, time dimension. You can make up geometry law. And I'm not allowed to say, yeah, prove it, bent space, show me a piece. What are you talking about? So I'm just saying, and then your theory doesn't even unify physics. It's all in pieces. It's left broken, unconnected. And you won't just accept that, wow, your theory's pretty good. It's probably worthy of some consideration because, yeah, the theory we have now doesn't do any of that shit. So it's pretty impressive that yours does all that shit. Yeah, we don't like that your theory still hasn't accounted perfectly for this friction problem. But, yeah, it does everything else really well. So, yeah, if you can fix that friction thing, you know, why photons don't hit photons, and why matter can travel through the force without friction, yeah, okay. I get it. But you don't seem to be saying that at all. You're saying that somehow it's not possible. Because somehow you've proven it not possible. You haven't done any of that. Alright, let's see. Gary would have to educate you first. Well, yeah, it's the same James guy. So really, you don't. If you have any like desire for the truth, that should be all that you need to say, to be honest and say, yeah, that fits. As I've stated about Einstein's theory, I'm saying it's a really interesting construction. You got to give him credit. It does create a mechanism that and ties two things together that you wouldn't think innately should be tied together: gravity and time. And it's a very interesting way of tying those two phenomenons together. You know, the phenomenon of velocity and time dilation with the phenomenon of mass and gravity and movement of planets. Yeah, it's an interesting answer to the question, but I would argue that it loses its interestingness as soon as you try to say, well, how does that apply to this quantum mechanics scale? What does that information do when you try to explain the strong force, or when you try to explain magnetism? Does it help? And no, it gets in the way. It makes it more difficult. All right. So here's another comment by Reverse. I'm sorry, but we're no longer living in the 17th century anymore. We now require facts and data to confirm theories, not personal opinions. So it's such a silly thing to say, because in the past the experiments were so overt. I mean, they were just They did all kinds of, Benjamin Franklin flying the kite. I mean, they did all kinds of hard physical experiments, collection of data. I mean, Newton being able to explain gravity was based on the fact that, you know, this other guy, whatever, some rich guy, who paid to have people observe the universe and collect a ton of data. And if it wasn't for that data set, Newton wouldn't have anything to work with. So, you know, to imply that the experiments in the past weren't legitimate experiments is just silly. And it's the ones now that are so abstract, so many moving parts and so many assumptions built into them, that they're the ones you have to be a little suspect of. As I pointed out with interferometers, I still haven't got an explanation from anybody how interferometers do in fact create two equal beams, because they don't. The beam that goes through the interferometer, the beam splitter first, will end up being diffracted more than the beam that goes through towards the end of the experiment. Do you have any explanation for how that doesn't actually happen? How the beam splitter isn't in fact a diffraction gradient? So these assumptions, I'm just saying, you know, these new experiments have a ton of assumptions built into them that may not be accurate. All right. So then he posted, the reverse guy again, he posted a link to the test for general relativity page at Wikipedia, which I've already gone through. And again, there's nothing brilliant in terms of the tests. The tests are the explaining the precession of Mercury's orbit, which is really doesn't have anything to do with general relativity. It just has to do with the field equations and the fact that Einstein recognizes the movement of the sun's center of gravity, where Newton really didn't. That's the difference. So the proofs are what? Again, we know that clocks on satellites, we know that decay rates of atoms change if the atom is moving, or the decayable element, let's call it that. So I guess you don't have to have a full atom to have decay. Protons can decay, you know, which, neutrons, which makes this sort of an interesting conversation. But yes, so it just creates a connection between velocity and decay rate. It doesn't prove general relativity. Anyway, so let's see what he says there. It has been getting verified over and over again in the past 100 years. Well, I would argue that it hasn't. The Eddington experiment hasn't really been successfully ever done well, and the Hubble telescopes never bothered to take a look at the sun, you know, near the sun, and photograph lensing aberration. Everything you see on that page is backed up by countless papers. Okay, yeah, they do lots of. You can do lots of talking about an experiment, but again, the conclusions are dependent on how well you did it. And just like the editing experiment's built based on how well you time. You have to get your times right. You have to get your knowledge of what you should be seeing correct. You have to get all that math correct, and there's lots of mistakes to be made. And the same would be argued that all the other experiments that are observing something like a lensing effect of radio waves, for example. You can have all the data in the world, but if the bottom line is your experiment isn't precise enough to answer the question, because it can't take the noise out of the equation, it can't compensate for the noise, the scatter. You can't tell the difference between scatter and lensing. Then what good is it? You can write 500 pages on it. It doesn't matter if your data isn't strong enough. And those experiments, the data is, you can, like I said, it's very complex data, lots of it, but it isn't decisive. So he says the data isn't going away. Well, the argument is that it Doesn't matter whether it goes away. The lensing images from galaxies aren't going to go away. But it doesn't change the fact that they're weak evidence for gravitational lensing because they're in insanely inappropriate places. The lens is, you know, a light year across. It's an insane sized lens. It doesn't make any sense. Even when they illustrate black holes lensing, the lensing isn't, you know, a half a light year away from the black hole. Let's see. Something which replace, let's see, this data isn't going away. If something were to replace general relativity, it would have to make similar predictions. Well, again, why you don't want to make similar predictions, you want to make better predictions. So again, I'm predicting there is no gravitational lensing. Although it's not a critical thing, but I'm just saying, why would one force and only one force be affected by gravity? Doesn't seem likely. Why are photons affected by gravity, and yet they're supposed to be electromagnetic radiation, and yet they're not affected by electric or magnetic? You can take the strongest magnet you can make on Earth and shine a laser next to it, and it just isn't going to bend any of that light. Match the data accurately, which requires mathematical model to make calculations. Well, again, no, all it requires is a model. It doesn't have to be mathematical. All it has to be is a model. A physical model will do. It's a perfectly good way to demonstrate whether it could or could not happen. So it doesn't have to be mathematical. But clearly, as I've stated before, my theory conforms to the math. I'm not rejecting the inverse square law. I'm explaining why it exists. I'm not rejecting the Maxwell equations regarding electricity. I'm completely conformed to them. Anyway. Let's see. My comment was removed either by Amendum or the filter for URLs. I think it was the filter. Yeah, there's no point in making your accusation your wrong speculation. But anyway, yes, the filter did it. Alright, so here he says, yeah, same thing. It's been getting, okay, so yeah, he's repeating himself because the first one got put in the filter. Got filtered. Yes. So I can see you're just constantly moving the goalposts. This will likely be my last comment. Yeah, right. I also fully expect all of these to be deleted soon. Well, it's another useless waste of time. Again, the burden of proof isn't on him. Well, again, I think I am satisfying the burden of proof, which is you have currently one thing to argue against this theory, right? I mean, we're still dealing with the friction problem. I mean, I've explained to you how there are mechanisms that account for that, in the sense that a school of fish is defined by fish. And if I have a fish come in and it reflects, I can always just take that reflection as my school, and I can just let a fish go out the back. And so therefore I can consume force as a positive action. That's just one way to explain it. I've also explained how the elements of friction are mostly with the things going not the way you're going. So if you have force going this way, and then you have force going this way, and you have force going this way, these forces are the ones that are the real laggers. They're the ones you're dragging, because you have to keep updating them to a new position. And when you update them, you actually turn them into this for a little while. So you have more force going this way. But anyway, as you go faster, you get thinner, in the sense that you lose the pieces of you going the wrong way. So I've provided explanations, and like I said, I'll provide. I understand I have to come up with something a little more rigorous to satisfy these objections. But let's just understand, it's just this one objection to defeat a whole theory that, unlike Lesage gravity, okay, so Lesage gravity you threw away because of this little friction problem, and I think it's a little problem, not a big problem, because we already know forces go through each other. We already know of the capacity for this stuff to miss itself. But regardless, they threw it out for that one problem. They didn't work on fixing the problem, they just threw it out. Said, fuck it. We don't even want to bother thinking about it. Now the theory has been upgraded. It explains magnetism and the strong force really well. It explains all the interactions between electrons and protons, essentially, electrons and protons. And explains where photons are essentially created in the pressure between electrons. And that's why it produces a certain frequency of light, is because of the compression. So it explains photons, the strong force, magnetism, and the pressure relationships between electrons and electrons, protons and protons, electrons and protons. It explains in depth magnetism and essentially electricity. And you're still throwing it out for this stupid little problem. So, I'm sorry, I find that ridiculous. And that you're throwing it out because you don't want me to be the guy who thought of it. You want somebody else to be the guy who thought of it. And that's all this is about. This isn't about anything else. It's just about the messenger, not the message. If Feynman was saying what I'm saying, you'd all be going, holy shit, he's so fucking smart. How did he think of that? Look at that, he just unified physics. The greatest, finished Einstein's work. You know, something like that. That's what you'd be doing. So this whole bullshit is just about the fact that it's me. And you don't like me. That's it. There's nothing else happening here. Alright. I mean, how many named physicists? If I got Michio Kaku to say, yeah, he did it. And he, you know, explains how, yeah, this answers all these questions. It's the right answer. And the universe is now a mechanical thing. It's not this abstract, silly crap we were thinking it was. And, you know, we don't have to worry about all this quantum mechanic crap. Clearly, the photons are interacting with electrons. That's why they're being diffracted. There's no magic going on here. There's no Heisenberg uncertainty mishmash. No. You don't think these idiotic arguments would work against Michio Kaku or deGrasse Tyson? This mush is what you'd throw at him? Yeah, no chance. Alright, anyway. Again, the burden of proof is on him, not us. He has rejected real-world observations in the past. So again, which real-world observation have I rejected? Name it, liar. Scummy liar. He throws out the data. What data did I throw out? Oh, you mean the double slit experiment where they recorded the results, and then when they turned the recorder off, the results changed when they stopped looking? You mean the experiment was never done? Yeah, I threw that one out, the one that was never done. Okay. Instead of using his theory to predict and explain certain data. No, again, I've made plenty of predictions about where you got it wrong. Galaxies are matter expanding, solar systems are matter contracting, that kind of thing. You know, lots of stuff. Anyway, science does not throw out data in favor of theories. So again, what data did I throw out? Name the data I threw out. You liar. I mean, you're just a grotesque fucking liar. So you'd use that against Michio Kaku, right? You'd say, you threw out data. And he'd say, what data, asshole? And then you'd have no answer, would you? That's right, you wouldn't have an answer. So I didn't throw out any data. I threw out your silly interpretations. Fuck. Let's see. It throws out data. Science does not throw out data, so he says it again in favor of theories. It throws out theories if they don't match reality. So again, what part of reality does my theory not match? What event in the universe is it counter to? It can't be compatible with. So explain an event that happens in the universe that my theory is not compatible with, or you're a liar. Unfortunately, just as a creationist will not be swayed by evidence. So again, what evidence am I supposed to be swayed by? You have gravitational lensing in insane places. You don't believe that. And you don't have it in places where there's every expectation it should be there. As pointed out, if Eddington is correct, if his results are accurate, then you should now, with video cameras, be able to actually watch a sun from behind the sun, or a galaxy. You should actually be able to watch it pop out from behind the sun, reverse its motion, and then go forward again. Where is your evidence? Where's your Hubble telescope video of that happening? Oh, that's right, it doesn't exist. So I didn't throw out evidence. You're missing evidence, and a ton of it. All right. Okay, so creationists will not be swayed by evidence, neither will you. So you're the one with, in my opinion, the God theory. So you have no evidence of the existence of bent space. Absolutely nothing. You just say it's geometry, and geometry makes things happen. No evidence. You have no energy, force, no mechanism that actually pushes Earths. No explanation whatsoever. It just happens. Something does it. The unnamed thing. And you have virtual photons, fake energy that goes from between magnets and conductors. This fake stuff goes there and makes the electrons move. That's your explanation. And then you accuse me of denying your evidence. Well, what's your evidence for the virtual photon? Oh, you mean the effect, and the fact that you just invent something fake to make the effect happen. A god. The god did it. And you're calling me the creationist. Right. Irony much? Yes. A creationist scientist is convinced that the earth is 6,000 years old. Well, again, he's convinced there's a God, and he's convinced then that anything God wishes to be true, it will be true. So, if God wants to put dinosaur bones in the ground, that's God's business. If he wants to try to fool us, it's okay. That's God's plan. Yes, but it doesn't have anything to do with him being a scientist, caring about the truth. And again, your parallel is that I've rejected what piece of evidence are you saying is as good as evolution? So what piece of evidence is as good as a dinosaur bone? So you show me the lensing images that in your opinion are as good as a good old brontosaurus leg. So why don't you show me one of those great images that's just as good as pulling a dinosaur bone out of the ground. All right. And we'll reject carbon dating. Yeah, so again, the parallel to rejecting carbon dating is me rejecting that you have some sort of proof that photons don't know where they are, that they're androgynous in their identity in the universe, especially when they get near a slit. Then they just totally lose it and can't figure out where they're going anymore. And you say that that's this, me saying, well, I don't see any evidence of that necessarily. That's stuff you kind of made up. I mean, there's an effect, but your explanation, in my opinion, is mush. And you're saying that's like rejecting carbon dating, to say that your explanation is mushy. And other evidence proving otherwise. So again, you keep saying you've proven something. What have you? Where's your proof? You're using the word proof. Where's the proof? proven is the inverse square law. That's proven. Much of Maxwell's equations, that's proven. Heisenberg, Huygens, that's not proven. Alright, so let's move on to some other subject. Mindless Marbles guy, I don't think I finished his. Thank you for your response. I have a few things to ask about gravity. First off, I think it is important to ask, on average, when the ton's deflected off the Earth. See, that's another argument. It's not really, they're not deflecting. They're absorbed. Their velocity component, their vector, their what's the word Feynman uses? Shit. I'm trying to think of the word he uses for one of his probability vectors. Amplitude. Okay, its amplitude has been absorbed. So the photon, the ton, comes in, the graviton, and it's used to move all of the matter of the thing. So it's caught inside, moving everything, just a little tiny bit. And that takes time. So deflected is too simplistic for what people require me to do in these arguments. I can't use those. I would like to just say, yes, generally speaking, that's the effect. If you think of it that way, it's easy to think about it. But I can't do that because then I'll get hung by these people for not being technically accurate. So you always have to think about it as not being a shadow created by bouncing things off of it, you know, pushing in the sense of push. You have to think the more complex way, what is a push but an absorption of force? So you have to think of it in terms of absorption of force. Is it deflected once or many times? See, it's not really deflected, it's absorbed. So once you understand that, then you don't have to worry about it bouncing around, because the whole point is no matter where it goes, it went in with one vector. And that's the only thing that's counting. The rest of it is like, it's like with charges. And if you're going to move to a charge that's repulsive, you have to do work. And it really doesn't matter how much zigzagging you do. The real amount of work is just the amount of work it took to get there in a straight line. And that's the only work there is. So it doesn't matter how long your path is to the target. Fuck you, critter. Critter of some kind. Anyway, yeah, I treat them like people. Fuck you. Anyway, so where was I? Yeah, so all that's being absorbed for a period of time is a movement in a direction. So you can think of it as the thing just slows down as it goes through the material. But the slowing down would be its moving matter during this period of time that it takes to get the matter to move. So it's spreading its momentum across maybe a million or billions of bits. Yeah. Also, when those tons are rejected, re-ejected out of Earth, are they ejected out only perpendicularly, or do they come out ununiformly? Well, there's no uniformity to perpendicular, because that's a 360 degrees of, it's 2 dimensions perpendicular. There's the dimension you're traveling in, and this whole circle is perpendicular. But obviously both are doing that to each kind. So the electrons are doing one thing, the protons are doing the opposite thing, so it ends up being the same thing in the end. But not all of that's half the reflections are going to be perpendicular reflections, half the reflections are going to be backward reflections. The point is no matter which one it was, it's the momentum that's being absorbed. So it's just this component that matters. This component is irrelevant. It just adds to the field energy that exists. So those components don't matter. It's this component being absorbed that matters. And yes, there would be an equal force to your momentum in terms of how much energy you've absorbed that you'll be releasing in those 3 dimensions. But it'd be hard to detect because it's moving. I mean, theoretically there's a force emanating from a bullet, from its perpendiculars. And you can sort of see that the way air currents are pushed out from an object. But it's hard to test because you have to move your test equipment with the bullet to actually sense it. So that's the tricky part. But I would argue that yes, it's there. There is a repulsive force that is an extra pressure created by your movement that will emanate from you perpendicularly. Alright. You'll be gravitationally repulsive when you're moving. I don't know, something like that. When you're moving in gravity, when you're accelerating in gravity, you'll be gravitationally repulsive if something's right next to you. Okay, first off, I think it's important to ask, on average, when the ton is deflected off the Earth. If it's deflected once, many times, okay, we did that, or uniformly. If we consider 3 dimensions, one can easily see that you can actually get a ton to be redirected in any direction just by using 2 collisions. Yeah, well, I don't know about any because of the geometry. It's all kind of right angle geometry. So you do have to put it in, into the equation moving. So I don't think just 2 would be enough to go in any direction. When you draw this stuff out, I mean, it was a little bit interesting because I was just playing with it briefly. It's not on this piece of paper. But it ends up being that double helix thing again. If you line up neutrons the right way, it ends up being a double helix. The right turns, can cross this way. So the red force is going here, the black force is going this way, and they're hitting the electron and then perpendicular and perpendicular. So if you line up all the perpendiculars the right way, you can create a double helix, which is kind of interesting that it shows up again. But I haven't played with it that much yet, but it's interesting. If we consider 3 dimensions, one can easily see that can actually do it. Okay, all right.